Talks on the End of Life, a series of public forums on how to handle the challenges of aging and the final days. Number 1 in the series, Conversations of a Lifetime, sponsored by St. Barnabas Episcopal Church with Hospice of Cincinnati.
And I'll tell you, thank you for being here today on a lovely fall day. It is becoming fall. I apologize up front if anything that we say might hit a chord or be a little too close to home, because that generally happens. This is a tough topic, and I appreciate you coming. A little bit about me. I worked for Hillrom for 21 years. It's a little bed company in Batesville, Indiana. I moved here about 13 years ago. I transferred from West Michigan. I'm a born and raised Michigander, and you will hear that in my voice. I have a very strong Michigan accent, and people say, "You're not from here, are you?" Nope, not. But I started my career in oncology, med-surg nursing, and in 1989 I started with Hillrom, and I worked in sales and marketing, and then back in sales management at the end of my career. And made a change a couple of years ago through some restructuring, and I had an opportunity to leave, which was both scary and exciting. Knew that I always wanted to be in hospice at the end of my career. Didn't think the end of my career was going to kind of happen at 51, but it did. And I started working for a nonprofit at Hospice 2.5 years ago. And it is the best job I've ever had. It's unbelievable. It's a great community. It's doing something that truly matters, and we care for those people who are at the end of their life and the people who love them. So today I'm going to be talking about the conversations. I do have some slides about hospice, but that's a different talk. We're doing that later. And so today we're really going to focus on the conversation. And I do have with me Deb Brooks. And Deb is a 30-year P&G'er who also took an early buyout a number of years ago and is a volunteer. And so little do you know, but she came to me last week and said, "Hey, I really want to volunteer." And of course, she's in marketing, so I, as the marketing executive, nabbed her and said, "Would you like to speak for us?" And so today's her first talk in the community, and we're really, really happy to have her with us. She has a very compelling story. It's always nice to hear stories from the people who have had the experience. So this is interactive. I'm not going to break you up in small groups, but if you have questions, I do want you to share what those questions would be, because if you have the question, very likely someone else in the room is going to have the question too. So just promoting conversations, I'll just start off with a few trends in terms of end of life. 2.4 million people die every year, yet only 44% of them are in hospice, meaning that we've got a really large percent of Medicare patients that die that were not in hospice. The reality is 70% of Medicare patients who die each year have chronic illness. So if 70% of the patients who die every year have chronic illness, and only 44% of them are in hospice, the other 30% of those 70% are not getting hospice care. So we're really looking to expand that, and we're trying to create what we're calling a conversation-ready community, and you'll hear more about that. Every day, 7,000 baby boomers, of which I'm one, and it looks like everyone else in this room is, turn 65 for the next 17 years. That's a lot of people coming into our healthcare system, and agree with Obamacare or not, something has to change so we manage end of life and we manage the control costs of care. 71% of Americans say they want to die at home, yet only 27% do. Who wants to die at home? Some, not all, right? Some want to die in a hospice, right? Some of you are going to say, "I want to be in Blue Ash." Blue Ash Hospice of Cincinnati has 4 inpatient care units. The other only inpatient care unit is through VITAS at Drake Center on Galbraith. No other hospice has, in our city at this time, has an inpatient care unit. So only 24% of hospices across the country even have one inpatient care unit. Cincinnati's really fortunate in that we have 4. So it's really a huge community benefit. It is a huge money loser. In the first 6 months of the year, we've already lost $1 million. We know that, we account for it, and that's why we raise money to cover those costs, but we truly believe that that's a community resource that we need to support. Many people need inpatient care when the symptoms become so uncontrolled that they need to have that inpatient care. So it's the ICU sort of for hospice patients. It's an alternative to going into the hospital. Hospice patients come into our inpatient care unit instead of going to the hospital. So our program here is a little bit unique. We'll talk about that more when we talk about hospice in the next presentation. But our goal is to say, of the 71% of Americans that say they want to die at home, we want those folks to die at home by teaching the caregivers what it means. And there's a diversity element here too. A lot of Hispanics are going to say, I don't want to give my loved one up to hospice because you'll take them into your inpatient care unit. And we're a very family-oriented culture, and we take care of our own at home. Because a lot of people think hospice is a place to go to die. It is not a place to go to die. It is a level of care. It's a Medicare benefit. It's also a philosophy of care. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there. But let's talk about end of life. So John Quincy Adams, I love this quote. In his 80th year, was walking in Boston, and a friend said, "How's John Quincy Adams today?" And he replied, "Thank you, John Quincy Adams is quite well, sir, quite well, I thank you. But the house in which he lives in at present is becoming dilapidated. It's tottering upon the foundations. Time and seasons have nearly destroyed it. Its roof is pretty well worn out, walls are shattered, and it trembles with every wind. The old tenement is becoming uninhabitable, and I think John Quincy Adams will have to move out of it soon, but he himself is quite well, sir." So what's he talking about? Is he talking about his house? Really talking about his body, isn't he? I just love that. So this is actually not a trick question. Does anyone know what the mortality rate is in the United States? It is 100%, but do we act like it's 100%? In the United States, we act like death is optional. We really do. We act like, it's not going to happen to me. You talk about your stocks with your kids. You talk about financial planning. You plan for college. You plan for weddings. You plan for births. You plan for retirement. You plan for so many things. You might plan for your funeral, but you don't plan for your end of life. Because we're a death-denying society, we don't really like to talk and think about it, yet it is going to happen to every single one of us. So the mortality rate is 100%, and I put 13 there as an estimate because I don't know, there is that cryo thing where you can freeze your head, so. There is a trend, yeah. So why don't we talk about end of life? When you see this Conversations of a Lifetime logo, that's the logo that Hospice of Cincinnati's created to talk about these kinds of topics and conversations around end of life. Bethesda Incorporated has given Hospice of Cincinnati a $2.3 million grant over the next 3 years to teach physicians how to have end-of-life conversations with patients and their families, because honestly, physicians don't know how to do it. They've never been trained for likely all the doctors that you and I go to have never had formal training on talking about end of life. They wing it. They do what's comfortable for them. They do what's worked, and some of them do it very, very well. Others are afraid to bring up that conversation. So our grant is going to go over 3 years, and we are going to put lots of time and resources into creating curriculums for physicians to go through, as well as teaching their offices how to talk about end of life. Children don't talk to parents because they don't want mom and dad to think that all they want are the jewels, the assets, the jewelry, the china, the house, the property. Parents don't talk to children because they don't want to burden their kids with that reality. I don't want to make them sad. Patients don't talk to doctors because they say, if it was my time, my doctor would have said it. My doctor would bring it up. We're waiting for the doctor to say it's time. And get this, doctors don't talk to patients because they say the family hasn't verbalized that they're ready to hear it yet. So literally everybody's doing what the scarecrow does, is saying that way, right? So we need to become more comfortable in talking about these conversations. But we don't have great tools. Who out there has had a conversation with their families about what you want at the end of your lives? Anybody?
Well, we wrote it all down and sent it in the mail.
Did you?
And then they didn't open it. They didn't open
Right.
it, and they put it in a drawer. They keep it safe, but they're not going to.
It's not time, because the kids can't imagine that mom and dad aren't going to be around. Yeah, I don't even want to think about it. Right. So did you write down everything, like whether or not you want to be on a ventilator, whether or not you want nutrition? Really? Good for you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Where the funeral's going to be, and,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think as an ex-hospice nurse, you would be, and a physician, shame on you if the two of you haven't.
He sort of gets me to do those things. I'm not
Right.
really good myself about that.
It's hard. These are tough conversations. They're really, really hard. So how often should we have a conversation? And this is in your pamphlet that we created. It's called the 5 Ds. These are good things that happen in our lives that would instigate a very easy transition into an end-of-life conversation. Death of a friend or a family member. If a divorce has happened, that sometimes is going to create redoing some of the wills and all of that kind of stuff. Great time to update all of that and talk about it. If you've had a diagnosis of a significant medical condition, if 10 years have passed, if a decade has passed, or if there's a sudden decline in physical condition, or a slow decline, but now you're saying, geez, you know, things are really getting towards the end and we need to do something here. So some decisions you'll want to make when you're having that conversation is designation of a healthcare proxy. So interestingly, when you designate your kids, and so Wendy, you're going to have someone's going to be, who's that going to be? One of your kids is going to be the power of attorney. Him first. Let's say you get into a car accident together. Then who?
our oldest son, Andy.
Right. And so.
Says, no parking off.
Yeah. No corking off. Okay. So let's say you're in. Does Andy live locally? Okay. So let's say. So you're in a car accident. Let's say you guys are all going to the zoo, and Andy's in the car with you, and you get into a car accident, and he doesn't get hurt, but the two of you do, and you're in the ER. Is he going to say, "Oh crap, I have to go back to my home and look in the safe to find out what mom and dad want?" Right? So be careful when you choose your proxy, because if he doesn't know what you want, and this is what this talk today is about, he is going to be making a decision in a crisis. When we make decisions in crisis moments, when we haven't had that discussion, we don't know what decision to make, we're making a guess, we're going to be wrong 40% of the time. And when Deb talks to you today, that is really going to resonate. It's going to be very clear how important it is to know, because things happen that you don't expect. Whether or not you want to be on life support and in what situation. We'll talk further in one of our talks about the MOLST form, which is Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And we'll talk further about exactly what that is and when you would do a MOLST form, but it's advanced directives on steroids. If you can kind of think about that, it gets very specific. Under what conditions would you want to be ventilated, hydrated? Do you want a tube feeding? Do you want CPR? Procedures that you want to receive or avoid. I will tell you, I think I'd probably have tattooed on my chest, no dialysis. I think I've taken care of way too many dialysis patients, and I just have an issue with that. But it just depends on what people's tolerance level is, and some of us are gonna say, you know what, if I'm really decapacitated and I'm in bed, and as long as you can see me, I'm okay with that. Other people will say, if I can't communicate and eat ice cream and watch the football game, I don't want to live. So, and there really is a physician who said that to his daughter. If I can eat ice cream and watch the football game, and she was like, Dad, you don't even like ice cream. And you're a literature professor and you don't even watch football. And he was like, but you get my idea, right? You know what I'm talking about. Whether or not organ donation is something that's culturally acceptable in your family, or something that is not preferred, and what hospice is. Do you want to be in hospice, and what are your feelings towards hospice? Where should the information be kept? I will tell you, the bottom one in the refrigerator, marked in a tube or an envelope, is where the EMS units are going to go and look if something happened to you and you can't find your will, and you can't find your DNR, your do not resuscitate order. That's where they look. So oftentimes if you have a parent or a loved one who has a chronic illness, it's great to put it on the refrigerator and just know where those pieces are. Because if you say the patient has a do not resuscitate and the E unit's there, they're going to ask to see it. And if you can't produce it, they actually will take the patient into the hospital. So make sure you know who your proxy is. Make sure your kids understand your close friends. And you can't, I mean, they need to, Wendy, you're going to have your kids open up those envelopes, because they really do need to know. And sometimes pastors and clergy can really help begin that conversation. And it can be done with humor. I'm going to show you a little video of, I think I'll do that next. I'll show you a little video of a family. So the conversationproject.org, and you have to have theconversationproject.org, is a website. It's a grassroots program that's started by Ellen Goodman. Do y'all remember who Ellen Goodman is? Prize-winning author for the Washington Globe, I guess. Retired a few years ago, and she started a grassroots program called the Conversation Project. ABC News is the media sponsor to that. And Ellen was going to launch a website, and I got wind of it. I kind of knew that they were doing this thing. They're in Washington. And so, you know, what do I got to lose? I called up Ellen Goodman, and she found out what we were doing with our Conversations of a Lifetime program and our grant, and said, hey, we're looking for a family to videotape having the end-of-life conversation. Would you be willing to find one? Do you have one? And I said, I have a great family for you. So a dear friend of mine, Mo Jennings, is on the west side. Her dad is Norb Ranz, R-A-N-Z. He's a retired dentist. Mo's mom died just 6 months earlier. And I asked Mo to have a conversation, invite ABC News into her home, and they were there for 8 hours, filming a 4-minute piece that appeared on Diane Sawyer on her dad's 85th birthday. And I will tell you, he just turned 86, and he got a hole-in-one last week. He is the coolest guy. He's got a senior swing, you know, he barely goes back. I'm like, look at that, he doesn't even take a backswing, and he can just, anyway, he's a delightful man. So I'll show you that. And have you, you'll get an idea of what these conversations look like. And Mo will tell you that the conversation, it was fun. It was actually really fun. So let me bring this up.
Finally tonight, ABC News wants to join you in something right at the heart of the American family. How we can all help the people who care about us make decisions near the end of our lives. And 9 out of 10 of you have told us that we should all be talking about it at all ages, what we want. And yet only a fraction of us have done it. And we know it makes a huge difference in the health of the caregiver as well as those cared for. So ABC News has taken cameras inside a vital, loving family, part of a new community, deciding to have The Conversation.
This is 85-year-old Norb and his daughter Maureen.
My dad is 85 today. He's still very, very active. He's a wonderful friend.
Throughout life, daughter and father have always talked about everything, except one thing: how to control the end of your life in the same way you control the prime of your life. So dad and daughter gather the family together, 3 generations, for an act of love.
And so now we're just asking that you share some of your thoughts about what you would like at the end of your life, so that we can honor your wishes.
They are part of something new underway for families in America that says having the conversation is a gift parents and children give each other. And there's proof of the difference it makes. Studies show depression rates plummet after a loss if the families have had the conversation. Renowned physician Dr. Atul Gawande says doctors and nurses see it firsthand.
When you're there in that moment and you're talking to the family and you're saying, how much will it bother your father if he ends up this way? And they say, more often than not, I don't know. We never talked about it. That it is incredibly traumatic for the family, for the doctors involved. There's often conflict. It can tear families apart.
So Dr. Gawande has become part of a team led by Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Ellen Goodman. It is called the Conversation Project. It is a kind of guide for families looking for a way to begin.
If we give them a way to talk about it and give people something to hang on to when they're afraid to start this conversation, they can do it and pass it on.
Families like the Jennings. They looked over the conversation guide before they sat down together. First, there's laughter.
My golf swing's still good.
And then Dad directly eases his daughter's guilt and worry about having put their mother in hospice.
I felt like that meant we were giving up on Mom.
She was in a lot of pain, and I think it was handled real well.
And next, Maureen asks her dad for clarity on what he considers a good end to a great life.
So if you were in a condition where you couldn't make decisions for yourself, how extreme would you want us to take measures to save your life versus letting you go?
Well, I think I'm ready to go anytime. You know, I wouldn't prolong anything. I mean, I've lived a great life. Pretty lucky. And because of you guys, you know. And
unexpectedly, a grandson is inspired to speak up about his own wishes for his own life.
That if there was no meaningful communication, that I would want you to stop trying to intervene.
we aren't ready for you to go that soon.
Well, we're not ready for you to go that soon either, so.
And one by one, the others weigh in, all ages.
Don't do that.
Happy birthday, dear Grandma.
And with that, another family has joined a kind of estate planning for the heart.
Go!
The conversation beginning in America.
So please tell us your stories in the days ahead about ways to begin the conversation with family members of all ages. Or if you don't want to have it, tell us about that too. My colleague and my friend, anchor Bill Ritter from WABC, and I will be reading your emails and looking at the great photos you're already sending us of your families. So go to abcnews.com, find the conversation and the guide, and we'll be seeing you right there.
Okay, so a couple things on what Dr. Rand said, and I apologize for the audio. What would you want us to do would you want us to prolong your life? And he said, no, I've had a really good life. I'm ready to go anytime, mostly because of you. So his kids have really stepped up to make sure that Dad's doing okay. He makes Mo breakfast every morning. She goes over to his house, and then they go to yoga at 6 o'clock in the morning at one of Mo's friends' houses. He's 85 years old. He just turned 86, and he's doing yoga. And I think what the family realized was how exhausting it was for Dad to care for Mom. She really wasn't sick for very long. She was sick for just a year, but they were joined at the hip. The funniest story that Dr. Rand's talked about at Mo's mom's funeral was the first argument that they got into. He was a dentist, and they were up at OSU, the huge OSU fans. And she said, "I don't know why I married you. I'm going to Mother's." And he said, "Can I get my golf clubs out of the trunk first?" And anyway, it was really, they were married for 61 years, and it was just very difficult to lose her. But the reality is that she was really declining. She had leukemia. She was only sick for a year, and then she had multi-system organ failure. So what they didn't know was what Mom wanted at the end of her life. They were just shooting in the dark and just trying to take a guess. They did it differently, and so they know exactly what he wants. So Mo and I were hiking one day in Mount Airy, and I said, "So Mo, you've had this conversation, you got videotaped. Does your dad want to die at home?" And she said, "Oh my gosh, I don't know." I said, you didn't even, what do you mean you don't know? You guys had 8 hours of conversation. And she said, "I never asked him." I don't think he does. He wants to be at home. He just wants, but he doesn't want to be a burden on the family. That's what most people will say is, "I do not want to be a burden. I want to be at home, and I want to be comfortable." And they're worried about being a burden, and so we keep seeking health care to take away that burden from our families. One thing that may be a barrier to getting that conversation started is there's ambiguity, or there's estrangement, or there's some difficulty in the family that can't get the conversation started. If you can't use one of the 4 Ds to start the topic, if you haven't had a death or you haven't seen a movie that kind of sparks the conversation about end of life, you could start by saying, "Please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you." Those are 4 starters to begin conversations, and Dr. Byock says those are words to use when parting from someone for an hour, a day, or at the end of a lifetime. So he believes, he's a palliative care physician out of Dartmouth, he believes that those are words we should use every day in our lives. If you see yourself using the "I forgive me" or "please forgive me" more often than the others, you might want to kind of reevaluate what you're doing. But they are really complete sentences, and I think it's really meaningful. If you're interested in the end-of-life topic, one book I would really recommend is Dr. Byock's book. It's called Dying Well. It's a beautifully written book that anybody could read from, any age. Every chapter is a different story about a different person. It could be somebody who's a young woman with 3 or 4 kids, and she's dying. There's a story in there about an older woman who's dying. There's a story about a farmer who's been always taking care of his family, and he cannot let his family take care of him. And how Dr. Byock says, "How are you feeling inside?" Because nobody ever asks that question. How are you feeling inside? They always say, "How's your breathing? How's your pain? How's your energy level?" When someone says, "How are you feeling inside?" it allows that person to kind of let go, because now somebody's really asking me about me. So if you look through the Conversations of a Lifetime brochure that you have, the middle of it gives you actual language to use to start a conversation with a family member. There are also conversation non-starters. So you're going to ask your mother, what she wants at the end of her life, and Mom may say, "It's in God's hands. I don't need to talk about it." Or they may say, "If we talk about it, it will happen. Let's just not go there." We have lots of time, Wendy. We don't need to talk about this yet, but we do. We really do need to talk about it. So the conversation non-starters are meant to stop the conversation because that person doesn't want to go there. And there's a response for that. It's in God's hands, and the response really is, I think that's written down here, is when we die, we're in God's hands. Right now, God's given us free will, and God wants you to plan. God wants you to help me understand what you want. And again, it's a gift. And the gift that you would be giving your children and that your children would be giving you is that your wishes will be carried out at the end of your life. So they don't, the burden on what you want is taken away from the children to guess, right? So if they really know what you want, they don't have to guess, and they don't have to feel guilty about, was the decision the right one? The decision, they don't have to argue with each other. That's exactly right. And all kinds of things happen when people die. You know that from estates and what happens with, I mean, it just brings out sort of the worst in all of us. And the more that you can plan ahead for that, the better it will go. The more decisions that you take away from the kids and say, this is what I want, this is all you have to do, then the kids are full force in charge of making sure that that happens. It's just like a doula, right? A doula is a birth coach that makes sure that the mom and the dad get everything that they want a natural birth, that they want a, whatever. That's what the doula is in charge of, making sure that that happens in a moment of, sometimes crisis, when you're having a baby and there's a lot of emotion. Same thing happens with death. So as long as you can get that written down and just be very clear, it is such a gift that you're giving your kids. I think there's one more slide, I think, and then I'm going to turn the mic over to Deb. Hospice, and this doesn't have to really be hospice care, but how do you want, how you or your loved one want to spend the end of your time? If you knew that it was coming, what would you want? Do you want to be comfortable? Do you want to have moments of joy? Do you want to be at peace? And what is it that you want? And how can you create the beginnings of that discussion with your kids and your loved ones? So I'm going to pass it over to Deb and let her tell you her story, and then I'll pick it back up after she's done. So there's your clicker.
Okay. You can put it up here.
Okay.
This is the first time I've done this, so I'm not going to walk around with a microphone. I'm not quite that talented yet. Let's see, where do I want to click, Janet?
Just point it right towards that. There you go.
Okay. So to start off with, my name is Deb Brooks. I'm a Cincinnati native. I've worked at Procter & Gamble for most of my life. Retired there in 2001. And this is a picture of my brother. So this isn't going well already, but it is what it is. So I'm sorry, but I want to start my talk with a scripture that my brother was his favorite, and it was Isaiah 40:13, and it is, "Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will not walk and not be faint." So this verse is one that my brother sent me over and over again throughout the years. And when I read it, I'm so sorry, I think about him. He was the kind of person who cared very deeply about what others thought, and he was not afraid to show it. This characteristic served him well throughout his life. He was a practicing Christian from a very early age. He was the baby of the family and the pride and joy of my mother and me as well. He was blessed with the gift of music from an early age, and that's a picture of him at his first piano recital. I believe he was about 10 at the time. In his late teens, he began writing music, songs, lyrics, melodies, and he had a great gift for it. He formed a band with a couple of friends, and in 2001, he moved to Nashville, Tennessee to fulfill his dream. He worked, his love of music, especially contemporary Christian music, was what he wanted to share with the world, and he felt like this was a way he could tell his story. Sorry, thank you. These are some other pictures of my brother. It's my brother Rob and me in the middle, and my brother Mike. And my favorite picture, my brother standing there alone, was taken as he was trying to launch his music career. He spent many years trying to break into the industry in Nashville, and it's a very tough business. After a while, he put his dreams of music aside and decided to focus his energy on his second passion in life, which was fitness. He was a very active child from the moment he was born. Constant motion. He was walking at 8, talking at a year, and we were chasing him from that moment on. He went back to school to become a certified personal trainer, and he began working for the YMCA in Nashville, Tennessee. These are some pictures of Rob with his band. They did produce 2 CDs. He had a couple singles that made the charts, but that was about it. Anyway, after going to work for the Y, he started at the very bottom. He went back to school to become a personal trainer and worked his way up the ladder to become the executive fitness director for the YMCA. He was dedicated to helping people gain the most out of their life, both physically and emotionally. And his heart was as big as the sun, and he never, ever met a stranger. Let me see here. This is a picture of my family at Thanksgiving a few years ago. So anyway, this past November, as was our family tradition, we met in Savannah to share Thanksgiving with my brother Mike, his wife Betty, and my mother. And the weather is always beautiful that time of year. Actually, it was a day just like today. Perfect. After sharing a lovely Thanksgiving meal, my 2 brothers and sister-in-law decided to load their bicycles into their truck and go for a ride. One of their favorite trails at a nearby park. And this was a bicycle, not a motorcycle, which many people were confused at once this accident happened. The last thing that Rob and I did before he left was to watch some old reruns of Lucy. One thing that he and I shared in common was a love of laughter and comedy. And he was in tears from laughing as he walked out the door that day for the last time to go for a quiet ride in the woods on a beautiful sunny day. It's amazing how dramatically life can change in the blink of an eye. And I think that's what Janet and Hospice is trying to share with us now. We take so much for granted in expecting that life will just continue as it is in this very moment. We don't expect bad things to happen to us, especially if we consider ourselves good people. We go to church, we have a job, we pay our taxes, we drive the speed limit. Bad things just aren't supposed to happen to us, but they do every minute of every day all over the world, and they usually happen when we least expect it. When my brother Mike arrived back at the house later and alone on Thanksgiving, my mother and I were in the kitchen making Christmas cookies. And all I said was, there's been an accident and we need to go to the hospital. He pulled me aside and he said, Deb, it's not good. It's really, really bad. I was expecting a broken arm or a sprained ankle or cuts and bruises, something fixable. But when we walked into the hospital ER, a nurse immediately came to meet us. And for those of you who've spent any time in an ER, you know that's very unusual. There's usually a long line, you sign your name and you sit and wait. So when that nurse showed up, I got a big knot in my stomach because I instantly knew this isn't good. My family and I were escorted back to a small room and waited for a doctor to come in who had been treating my brother. He arrived shortly, sat down, and he said, I have some bad news. Your brother has severed his spine. He's crushed multiple vertebrae in his back. We're going to need to do surgery once the swelling goes down to stabilize his spine, but he will never walk again. In fact, he will be a quadriplegic for the rest of his life. And we sat in stunned silence, the breath literally just taken out of the room. Was there nothing the surgeons could do? Were they positive about this diagnosis? Couldn't something miraculous happen that would make my brother whole again? And every question was answered with, no, I'm sorry. There's nothing that we can do. And we were in shock. None of us had seen my brother since he got into the hospital, and I asked if I could go back to speak to him. He was conscious, he was alert, his mind was racing, his heart was pounding, and he was in a lot of pain. So I opened the door, hoping that he might be sleeping, but he wasn't. Our eyes locked immediately as he was trying to read my reaction. I kissed him on the forehead and I asked him how he was feeling. And he said, Sissy, I can't feel my arms and legs. I'm going to be paralyzed, aren't I? And I said, Rob, we just don't know that yet. We're waiting for some test results. But I assured him it was going to be okay. And I told him how much I loved him. He looked at me and he said, Deb, I can't live like this. I can't be paralyzed. Promise me you won't let me live like this. And I promised him. 30 minutes later, the neurosurgeon came in to speak with Rob and our family and said without emotion, as doctors do, I'm sorry, but there's no chance you will ever get out of a wheelchair if you survive these next few critical days. He explained that they wanted to put a halo on his head. I said he's already got one, to help relieve the pressure on his crushed spine and assured them that he would feel better once this procedure was done. He went on to explain that Rob would need to be intubated soon or he would die from his lungs filling up with fluid. He also shared that he would need additional surgery to stabilize his spine, and then he left the room. Obviously, we were in tears, trying to comfort my brother, and he just kept saying the same thing. I can't live in a wheelchair. I can't do it. Soon the nurses came back to take him to the OR, and we were left to wait. He was finally placed into a room around 6 a.m., and we never left his side. The first surgeon to come in that morning was cheerful and optimistic. And he shared with my brother that he could have a very full life, even if he couldn't walk or use his arms. As he spoke, my brother was shaking his head, no. The surgeon went on to explain that Rob was in shock, and it would take him some time to adjust to his new reality. As soon as he left, we began to talk with Rob about his desire not to live as a quadriplegic. Later that afternoon, another surgeon came in to speak with Rob and shared the same information as the first. He wanted him to know that strides were being made every day to deal with paralysis, and who knew what the future might hold. Again, my brother was not receptive to the idea, and he cried as he said he was sorry for putting his family through this. That's the conversations we need to have while we have the chance. I think I need to go to a new slide. As the day wore on, our despair deepened as we realized that there would not be a happy ending. My nephew flew in from town to see my brother, his uncle, before he passed. And my brother's girlfriend arrived the next day from Nashville. They'd just been together a few short weeks earlier to celebrate my brother's 48th birthday. We met with the doctors, the family, without my brother, And we asked them what was going to happen if he wasn't intubated. And they shared that he would die within a day or two. At this point, we told them we want hospice to come in. All we care about is keeping him comfortable for as long as he's here. An hour later, a representative from hospice arrived at the hospital and met with us to share what they would do over the next few days. Again, their goal was to keep him as comfortable as possible in whatever way that they could. These women were so kind to our family and to my brother during the next few days of his life. We were able to spend the next 2 days at my brother's side. He was conscious the entire time. His facilities were about him, and he knew exactly what was happening. And we supported him in his decision, as hard as it was for us to lose him. We wiped his brow, arranged his pillows, gave him ice chips, and spent the next 48 hours watching him slowly fade away. It's 7 o'clock. 3 days after this accident, he slipped away for the final time. And he stepped into God's glorious light. And we had such comfort in knowing where he was going and that he was going to be okay. We were blessed that Rob was awake and able to share with us throughout his ordeal what he wanted. What if he had been in a coma with the family left to make this decision? Would we have made the right one? Could we have agreed on what was the right one? I can tell you right now, we wouldn't have agreed. I already know that. Could my mother have made this decision? And would my brother have hated us if we had kept him alive as a quadriplegic? We need to talk about what we want at the end of our lives to our family members now. Don't keep it a secret. It's probably the most important message and discussion you will ever have with people that you love and care about. We were lucky in that my brother was awake and he could tell us what he wanted. Chronic or sudden illness affords many people the chance to talk about it. Others aren't so lucky. It wasn't our decision, and it was his. And it was his life and ultimately his death that he chose in his way as he wanted. Because of the care and the comfort that we received from so many at hospice that weekend, we were given the opportunity to say anything and everything that we wanted to share with our brother. We laughed about some horrible family vacations we'd been on and silly events that we'd experienced as a family throughout the years. We were united in our support of my brother and so grateful to the hospice personnel who did everything they could to make our time together meaningful. And as a result, we had that one last chance to love, to hug, and comfort our brother. Thank you.
So I'll tell you, that's just about the hardest thing that anybody does. So great job, Deb. Thank you so much for sharing. You know, when Mo Jennings tells her story, she tells her story about her mom who was ill for a year and they neglected to have the conversation. I have another volunteer, Luann, she was a nurse, and her father-in-law had a progressive illness, and they made a decision for hospice in the hospital, and they chose not to put a tube feeding in, et cetera, and he was an elderly man. Deb's story is so compelling because it's a sudden event that really could have put this family in a spiral that may never have been resolved, because it was so important that everyone agreed what to do, because Mom was going to have to make that decision as the next of kin. But because Rob was capable of making that decision, he's the one who did it. And what a gift it was for Deb's family to be able to say, this wasn't our decision, this was Rob's decision. And that same thing happens when you plan and you've got advance directives and you can say, it's not my decision, it's my parents' decision, and this is what they would have wanted. This is a quote a little poem that Deb wanted to end with. And I'll open it up for any questions. I'll also share resources that we have.